My name is Alex. A few years ago, I flew to the USA with a single suitcase, broken English, and a dream that seemed bigger than myself. I wasn't looking for an easy path, I was looking for a chance. A chance to prove that I could do more than I had ever been allowed to believe. The first months were like survival. Every day, new words, new rules, new fears. But at the same time, the feeling that I was finally in a place where I could start everything from scratch. When I got a job at a small company in California, it seemed to me that this was the very first step toward a new life. The company was small, but alive. Things were constantly breaking, changing, burning with deadlines. And I liked it. I would arrive earlier than everyone else and leave when the office was already empty. I took on additional tasks, helped colleagues even when it wasn't part of my responsibilities. I wanted to be needed. My first boss noticed this. He wasn't a person of loud words, but sometimes, walking by, he could stop and say, "Good job, Alex. You've got potential." I still remember those words. They sounded simple, but for me, they meant a lot. For the first time in a long while, I felt that I wasn't just tolerated, someone believed in me. I started making plans. For the first time, I allowed myself to think not only about bills and rent but also about the future. The changes didn't start sharply, they crept in like cold. At first, he barely paid attention to me, but I felt the tension. The look, which had no curiosity. The tone, which had no respect. Soon it turned into constant criticism. Why so slow? Who did this? This is your responsibility. Even when the mistake wasn't mine, somehow the responsibility always became mine. The worst part wasn't even that. The worst was when he criticized me in front of others. When you stand with your eyes down, and you feel your self-confidence crumble in front of colleagues. I endured. I convinced myself that it was temporary. That if I worked even harder, everything would get better. I started going earlier and leaving later again. But now it was not out of hope, but out of fear. And one morning, I was called to the office. Everything happened too quickly. No explanations. No chances. Just a dry phrase. "We're letting you go. You can pack your things." I remember walking back to my desk. Colleagues pretended to be busy. Someone looked away. Someone awkwardly smiled. I packed my things silently, as if it wasn't happening to me. When I walked out of the building, the sun was shining as brightly as always. People were going about their business. The world didn't stop. Only I stopped. Without a job. With debts. With the feeling that everything I had worked for disappeared in a single conversation. That day I sat in my car for a long time, staring into nothing. Questions without answers spun in my head. Where did I go wrong? Why me? And what now? It seemed that luck had finally turned away from me. But it was exactly at that moment, when I thought it was the end, that a thought appeared that changed everything. What if this is not a defeat, but a release? Not from a job. But from fear. From someone else's control over my life. I didn't yet know where I would go next. I didn't know how I would survive. But for the first time in a long time, I realized, my story was not over. It was just beginning. The first week after being fired felt endless. Time stretched as if someone deliberately slowed life down so that I could feel every minute of emptiness. I woke up early, automatically reaching for my phone, and only then remembered that I no longer needed to check emails, messages from the team, or the day's schedule. The apartment was too quiet. Even the sounds of the city outside seemed alien. I walked from room to room, trying to keep myself busy with anything, so as not to be alone with my thoughts. But they still caught up with me. I started replaying the past. The first days at the company. Words of support from my old manager. My belief that if you work honestly and persistently, the system would reward you. Now it all seemed naive. Money was disappearing faster than I expected. Every payment made me hold my breath. I counted days, not weeks. And for the first time since moving to the USA, I felt true fear, not of work, not of the language, but of uncertainty. The most painful was the feeling of uselessness. As if, along with my badge and work email, I had lost the right to be part of something bigger. I caught myself thinking that I was starting to doubt the guy who once came here with a dream. One evening I sat in the dark for a long time, not turning on the light. And suddenly I realized, if I allow this state to drag me down, I will break not because of being fired, but because of my own silence. And then a simple thought appeared in my mind, calm, almost cold: defeat is not what happens to you, but what you decide to do with it. I didn't become stronger at that moment. No plan appeared. But I stopped running from myself. I acknowledged, I am scared. It hurts. But I am still here. Before going to sleep, I opened my laptop. Not for a resume. Just to write a few lines for myself, who I am and what I don't want to lose, even if I have lost everything else. It wasn't a breakthrough. It was a stop to the fall. And from that moment, my forward movement began. The next few days, I tried to keep myself together. I got up early, made coffee, sat at the desk, as if I had a job again. I forced myself to restore routine, because if structure disappeared, so would I. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not a resume, thoughts. What I could do well. What I had been doing for years. What I had once been praised for. For the first time, I looked at my experience not through the eyes of the manager who fired me, but through the eyes of the person who had gone through that path. And then I saw one thing I had ignored before: I had always solved problems. Not just completed tasks, but filled gaps when everything was falling apart. I took responsibility where others stepped aside. And maybe that was my real value. That day a friend wrote to me. We hadn't talked in a long time. Once we had worked on a small project together. The message was short. Hey, I heard you're looking. Coffee? We met in a small cafe. The conversation was simple, without pretense. I didn't complain. I just explained what had happened. He listened carefully, then said something that made me think. Have you ever thought about working not for a company, but with companies? This question hung between us. I didn't answer immediately. I had never seriously thought about it before. For me, there had always been only one path: find a job and hold on. Returning home, I replayed these words again and again. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't about fear. It was about curiosity. About possibility. That evening I opened my laptop and began to explore. Not hoping for quick success, but just to understand, is there another way of life than the one I had clung to so stubbornly? It wasn't a decision yet. But it was the first step. And I felt, something was beginning to change. The idea wouldn't leave me. Working not for a company, but with companies, it sounded beautiful, but too unusual. My whole life had been built around stability, a fixed schedule, a salary, clear boundaries. Even if it was hard inside, everything outside seemed safe. Now that safety didn't exist. I caught myself looking for excuses. Now is not the time. I'm not ready. I need stability. But to be honest, I was just afraid. Afraid to take responsibility not only for work but for the result. Afraid that if I tried and failed, I would be the only one to blame. I opened job sites, scrolled through them without enthusiasm, and closed them. For the first time, I didn't feel joy at the thought of finding a new job. As if something inside no longer wanted to go back. That evening I sat at the laptop again. Not to search. I started imagining what my day would look like if I decided for myself what to take on. If my time depended on me. If my value was determined by results, not someone's opinion. And in that moment, a thought I had once heard from Roosevelt appeared in my head, now feeling like both my own fear and challenge. The only thing that can truly stop you is the fear of the fear itself. I realized one simple thing. I had already lost what I feared losing. Stability. Position. Confidence. So what holds me now? I didn't make a decision that night. But for the first time, I didn't reject the idea. I allowed it to stay. To settle in my head. To see if it would take root. And this time fear didn't look like an enemy. It looked like a sign that I was on the threshold of something new. The next morning I woke up with a strange feeling. Yesterday I thought I wasn't ready, that I had to wait for the perfect moment. And today something inside whispered, just start. I opened my laptop and dared for the first time to write a short message to the friend who had once suggested working, not for a company, but with companies. My message was simple, almost casual. Hi. I'm curious to learn more about what we talked about. Sending it, I felt a slight fear, like jumping into cold water. In that moment, a thought echoed in my head that I had read before and now felt personally, not starting is the only way to stay where it hurts. He replied the same evening. Invited me to a short meeting. I agreed, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. That evening I thought a lot about what I had done. It was a small step, completely unnoticed by the world. But for me, it meant a lot. I realized that moving forward doesn't require huge leaps. It's enough to take the first one, and even if it's small, it still changes everything. Before sleep, I felt a slight excitement. I wasn't calm, and that was good. Finally, I felt that I could influence my life again, not just feel its pressure. I still didn't know what this meeting would lead to. But I knew one thing, I had a plan, small but my own. I arrived at the meeting a little early. The small cafe, the smell of coffee and fresh pastries, everything seemed too ordinary for what was happening inside me. My heart was racing, my hands were slightly trembling. This was my first step into the unknown, and I felt it in every cell. We sat at a table. He smiled simply and without pretense, immediately easing part of the tension. The conversation was easy, no talk about the past, no complaints. Only facts, ideas, possibilities. I listened and caught myself thinking that I hadn't felt such energy in a long time. My eyes burned with what seemed like a real opportunity. But along with curiosity came fear. What if this isn't for me? What if I fail again? I took a deep breath and remembered a simple thought that had carried me through all the fears of the last few weeks. The first step is always scary, but without it, the movement will never begin. And this time it wasn't just words, it felt like an inner support. The conversation didn't last long, but when I left the cafe, my steps were no longer heavy. The fear remained, but alongside it appeared a sense of control. For the first time in a long while, I realized, now the decision depended on me, not circumstances or other people's opinions. I still didn't know if anything would come of this opportunity. But I felt, now I had a plan, small but my own. The next day I sat at my laptop with trembling hands. Yesterday's meeting had left a strange feeling, both fear and a surge of energy. Fear reminded me that any mistake could be costly. Energy whispered, just try, and everything can change. I opened documents, made a plan. Small, concrete steps, prepare materials, contact a few potential clients, list my strengths. I felt how each item took away part of the anxiety and added part of the confidence. And suddenly a thought hit me that had passed through all my past and now sounded like an inner voice: no action is wasted if you do it consciously and with intention. This simple truth gave strength. Even if something goes wrong, I will be able to rise and try again. I started calling, writing, sending messages. Each small contact felt heavy, but together they formed something bigger, my own movement forward. In the evenings, I reflected, fear hadn't disappeared, it was just a background. And I started noticing the results of my actions, even if small. I still didn't know how it would all end. But now I understood, every step brings me closer to making my life mine again. The following days were like a chaotic dance between fear and determination. I woke up early, made coffee, checked my to-do list, and dove back into work. Every call, every email, every meeting was a small test. My heart raced, my hands trembled, but I didn't retreat. Then one evening I received a response from one of the potential clients. They agreed to a short consultation. At first, I could barely contain my surprise, it seemed too good to be true. But at the same time, my heart quietly rejoiced, my first real chance. Preparation for the meeting took the whole day. I reviewed notes, thought about what to say, how to explain why I could be useful. Every little detail seemed critical. Fear returned, whispering, "What if you fail?" And then the thought returned, which had appeared before, which now became my quiet guidance: no action is wasted if you do it consciously and with intention. It reminded me that even if the result isn't perfect, I'm already moving forward, and that's more important than any mistake. The meeting went better than I expected. I spoke clearly, calmly, sometimes nervously, but sincerely. They listened, asked questions, showed interest in my experience. And when we finished, I felt something I hadn't felt for a long time, the confidence that my efforts mattered. On my way home, I realized fear no longer ruled me. It remained, but alongside it appeared energy, the energy of movement, belief in my own abilities. A small success gave me a new sense of control. I realized that now even the smallest step could turn into something bigger. That night I went to bed tired, but happy. I understood, fear would always be nearby, but now I knew I could use it as a force, not a chain. I was ready for the next challenges. After completing my first big project, my life started to feel a little different. Those small signals that once seemed random were now turning into clear paths. New contacts, new acquaintances, new opportunities, all of this was no longer just ideas, but things I could truly influence. New clients wrote to me, offered collaboration. I felt that my efforts were beginning to return, and this gave me confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. But along with it came doubts. Is everything happening too quickly? Will I have the strength to maintain the pace? One evening I sat down again and looked at the list of all my steps over the last months. From small contacts to the big project, every step looked like proof that my actions mattered. I realized that successes don't happen suddenly, but are made of sequential steps I took day after day. And then a thought appeared in my head that I had read before, but now felt like my own voice: opportunities appear where you dare to act. This became my inner support. I realized that now I shouldn't wait for the perfect moment, I had to create it myself. Gradually, I began to feel that I wasn't just working for results, I was creating them myself. All these small victories and new acquaintances gave me the strength to move further. I began to see a perspective I couldn't even imagine before. This feeling was changing me. Fear still appeared, but now it served as a guide, not a limit. I felt like a person who could influence their life. And for the first time in a long while, I realized, the future doesn't just happen, it's built by the actions you take today. That night I went to bed tired, but with a new sense of purpose. My life was starting to return to my own hands. Now everything felt different. The small victories and stability of the past weeks had transformed into something bigger, a sense of scale. I began participating in projects that affected not only me but also other people. Every step I took, every decision mattered to clients, colleagues, and partners. Fear still appeared, but it no longer paralyzed. It served as a reminder that responsibility grows alongside opportunity. And with this realization came a feeling of strength I had never felt before. I worked for several hours without a break, controlled processes, helped the team, solved problems, and saw results. The small successes that once seemed enough now formed something much bigger: influence on people, change that left a mark. One evening, while reviewing my work results, a quiet thought came to mind that now became my guiding principle: success comes when you not only move forward but also make your movement help others. I realized, I was no longer just in the game. I was influencing its course. My actions created new opportunities, not just for me, but for the people around me. This responsibility was frightening and at the same time empowering. When I went to bed that night, the feeling of excitement was combined with deep satisfaction. Fear was still present, but it no longer controlled me. I understood that now my path was not only about reaching my own goals. It was a path that opened doors for others too. I was ready to take the last step, to complete the cycle, and see where this journey would lead me. Everything I had gone through now seemed part of one big picture. From the first days in the USA to losing my job, from fear and doubt to small steps and first victories, it all created the foundation of who I had become today. I looked at my life and saw that now it belonged to me. I made decisions myself, not reacted to circumstances. Every step, every risk, every small action formed the long path I had walked with my own feet. The sense of strength and confidence intertwined with the understanding of responsibility. I now understood, every action I take matters not only to me but also to those around me. My words, my decisions, my energy, all of this creates a space where others can grow too. And at that moment, a thought echoed in my head that became my inner guide: true freedom comes when you take responsibility for your life and aren't afraid to create your own reality. I remembered those sleepless nights after losing my job, when silence was louder than any words. I remembered fear, despair, doubt, the feeling of uselessness. Now all of that seemed like preparation, a test that taught me to keep moving even when it felt like I had no strength left. I felt pride and gratitude at the same time. Pride for myself, for not giving up, for not retreating, for not waiting for someone else to solve my problems. And gratitude for all the lessons, both kind and harsh, that had brought me to this point. Today I saw not just work or projects. I saw my life. I saw the path I chose, and the possibility to move forward boldly and confidently. I knew there would still be fears and doubts. There would still be challenges. But now I was ready. Because now I understood, you become who you want to be when you stop being afraid and start acting. And with this understanding, I took a deep breath, feeling that the life I had always wanted was finally starting to belong to me. Everything I had gone through, every moment of doubt, every fear, every failure, now felt like a preparation for this moment. I realized that life wasn't about avoiding fear, but about moving forward despite it. I saw that every small step I had taken, even when trembling, uncertain, and afraid, had created a foundation I could now build on. And that foundation was strong. Stronger than any temporary stability or comfort I had once clung to. I understood that my life no longer depended on someone else's approval or the security of a fixed path. I had learned to create my own opportunities, to trust my own abilities, and to take responsibility for the direction I wanted to go. And at that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a true sense of freedom. A freedom that came from knowing that my choices, my actions, and my courage were shaping the life I wanted.